Hey everyone, this is Yeri of Astrology Healing Arts, here with the counter-narrative, the backstories, and as recently promised, some mundane astrological chart readings on recent political events. At this point, it should come as no surprise that so many things have been happening at the end of the year and the beginning of the year. It's almost like these sorts of things have been planned in advance. And of course, we had this most recent event having to do with the Somali scam that was during December, but it really kind of blew up at the end of the year. And the allegations regarding the fraud in these Somali-run child care centers in Minnesota. So there's claims of fraudulent practices involving misappropriation of federal funds allocated for childcare programs, and at this point there are ongoing investigations into this situation. But to address the role of the Somali in the situation is also considered to be racist right now in the US. So my main point here in bringing this up is that many times it is during these pivotal points, these cross quarters of the year, which I mentioned in my book, Psychic Self-Defense in the Zodiac, there's often some sort of political emergency, some sort of crisis or attack, or in many cases, staged events. So at the end of 2025, this whole thing started coming out, and it seemed perfectly timed with the solstice. As is often the case with these types of events, it's become so predictable. Then on January 1st, a fire destroyed a historic Dutch former Catholic church, well over a century old, in Amsterdam, and it was decided about a month prior to that there would be a ban on the purchase and use of consumer fireworks to take place on that day of January 1st. And for I don't know how long, the Dutch people have really enjoyed fireworks. I've spent some time in the Netherlands with my husband, and so I remember this was something that they were very into, and I do understand, that it's bad for the environment, and that's the pitch, of course, to enhance the safety of people and animals and reduce, environmental damage caused by these fireworks. But it's just uncanny timing that, this ban had already been decided, and then in the capital, this historic church is suddenly, another mysterious fire, just like Notre Dame. And in the past decade, there's been a significant increase in all of these random, church arson incidents, they call them, all across Europe and the US as well. But there's a report here that in 2024 alone, there were 94 arson attacks on churches. That's insane. So we need to understand the big picture here, which is the very real attack on Europe by mass forced migrations. Very taboo but necessary to understand subject, because we have, here in the US, we have a similar threat, although this is already a pretty big melting pot that we live in. But just understanding the way that these elites operate, and it's always a mysterious fire. I don't know how many of you listen to My Lunch Break. I'm very fond of the channel. I think it's very informative, and those of you who are familiar with the research topic, it's just so uncanny how there are countless churches and old world buildings that are destroyed by fire, and how many of these buildings are made of stone and brick. It's harder for a stone or brick building to be burned down than, of course, wood. But yet it happens so often that we must ask, first of all, why? Why is this such a pattern? And why is it so often such a mystery? Oh, unknown causes, yet again. Okay? So that's the first thing I wanted to go over. Now, what we are looking at, what's in front of us, is the military operation of Trump's capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, which happened on the full moon on January 3rd, 2026. What a coincidence. At the start of the year, on a full moon, we have to look at these charts. They're incredible. The chart overlays the full moon chart itself, but also overlaying this full moon on the chart of Venezuela, which has two charts, and I'll explain that in a moment. Also, the US chart, and then I got a little treat for you here. So let's go over some of the mainstream narrative surrounding this, that it was drug trafficking and narco-terrorism being the primary official justifications used by the Trump administration to execute this thing called Operation Absolute Resolve. So the idea that this whole thing is a war on drugs. Well, it turns out that it's about the oil and resources in Venezuela. And they're not even really trying to hide that anymore. They've been trying to get in there for a while, and it's okay. So you know what? Let's do this in pieces. Let's take a look first at the chart of the full moon. I just want to see what are the potentials in this full moon that has already passed and what's come of it. This full moon occurred during an already very powerful week with first Venus and then Mars now to be in Cazimi with the Sun, as Sun, Venus, and Mars form oppositions to Jupiter. So as you can see in the chart, there's a huge focus in the sign of Capricorn, which has to do with authority, leadership, and government. And Capricorn's ruling planet, Saturn, is in Pisces in a conjunction with Neptune in the final degrees. So closing a major chapter here. And there's a lot of very cataclysmic endings occurring collectively and in a lot of different states, governments, nations. So this chart shows the potential for different legislations and government operations to come into focus. I also noticed that the Sun, which is always exactly opposite of the full moon, was in a conjunction with fixed star Nunki, that's spelled Nunki, which is a star linked with military strategy and explosives. And Trump gave the go-ahead for strikes on January 2nd, and then on the 3rd, during the full moon, there are photographs and footage of pedestrians seen running from these explosives. And that's when Maduro was captured. So there's a lot going on here in this chart that gives us some hint at what would be unfolding. Now I want to take a moment to explain why we have two different natal charts for Venezuela. Venezuela declared its independence from Spain in 1811, but became a sovereign state in 1830 after separating from Gran Colombia. The period between these dates involved significant political changes. I wanted to look at both charts because I wanted to find out which one makes more sense. Now, the earlier chart is the one that most people are using, but there's a lot that can make sense in both charts. If we look at the transit. So let's start with overlaying the full moon on the most recent chart from 1830. What's interesting about this chart is that Sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars are all very close to the natal Jupiter and Neptune in Venezuela's chart. And Neptune is exactly opposite of the Sun by transit. That's pretty significant. And Neptune rules drugs and oil. So we have this narrative that, that this is mainly about the drugs, but obviously it's about the oil and a few other things that I'm going to mention. But let's take that into consideration. Also, of course, Saturn. Saturn's right there next to Neptune. Saturn also on the placement of Mars in Pisces in this chart. Well, you can count Neptune too. I mean, they're both late degrees Pisces. So these are very, I would say direct hits or signals that something's going on here. And again, this is a less used chart for Venezuela, but this is the chart that really has to do with it becoming a sovereign state. Now taking a look at the earlier chart for Venezuela with the full moon overlaid on top of it. This chart also makes sense because the full moon is right on top of Venezuela's sun in this chart, which is a Cancer sun instead of a 29-degree Virgo sun. So that's pretty significant. I mean, it's a direct hit, right? A full moon right on the sun, I would say, is a pretty big indication that something is happening regarding the nature of this, nation, or if this was a chart for an individual person, then something big would be happening in this person's life. Also, this focus of Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, they're all pretty close to the moon in this chart. And it's a full moon chart. I mean, it's a gibbous moon to be exact, but it's an almost full moon chart too. So it's, any way you cut it, the happenings during this full moon, for anyone that was studying the chart of Venezuela, they would have expected something to happen. Uranus is also right on the descendant in this chart, so it's bringing a lot of crazy things, unexpected things having to do with foreign relations. Now check out the synastry between the USA and Venezuela's chart. Both have Sun and Cancer just 1 degree away, and both have Mars and Gemini just 1 degree away. And that Venus in Venezuela's chart is very close. Venus and Jupiter, Mercury, they're all very close to Mars in the US chart. And yeah, I mean, this is a pretty strong set of connections here. Venezuela's Neptune retrograde in Sagittarius is in the 12th house of the US chart on its ascendant. So again, this is the planet that would rule over the drug cartel, but it's also the planet, like I said, that rules over oil. So it's interesting again because 12th house is another house that deals with foreign relations, that deals with oil, that deals with secrecy, intrigue, scandals, these sorts of things. Also, Venezuela's Mars is in the US 12th house. We can also flip it over, but I just think it's interesting how many connections there are between the two charts. We don't really need to flip it over. I think we get the general idea here. I want to move on to other things. I did an overlay chart with Maduro and the full moon, and it just wasn't as exciting as I hoped it would be. But also, we don't know his exact time of birth. It has a Rodin rating of C, and then we have his supposed time according to his mother. So I looked at that chart, and what I did see that I thought was notable, Pluto making a transit conjunction to his south node in Aquarius, and that Saturn-Neptune conjunction preparing to make exact trine to his Mercury, and also the North Node close to making a conjunction with his Jupiter. But nothing was really exact, and that's why I was like, nah, I don't know. I would rather look at the other charts because they explain more of what's going on. So make of this what you will. I'm sure other astrologers are dissecting all of this, so I just thought it was worth mentioning since we are talking about this whole topic with Venezuela. In less than a week's time from Maduro's capture, a female president has stepped forward to take his place. Delcy Rodriguez. President Trump supported Rodriguez over Maria Machado, a prominent opposition leader from Venezuela who is a strong supporter of Israel. Well, you could say close call there, but we don't know what the outcome of this is. Let's just keep our eyes open. Machado was born under a Libra sun. She is close to experiencing her second Saturn return, so that should be interesting. The Saturn return occurs every 28 years and marks a significant developments in one's career, among other things. I wanted to take a look at the primary link between the situation in Venezuela and AIPAC, because even though this organization has no formal mandate regarding Venezuela, its influence and actions of its top donors have been closely linked to the fallout. One of the key players is a man named Paul Singer, and the related economic interest, according to analysts, report that Singer's investment firm, Elliott Investment Management, is going to gain billions from a potential fire sale of Venezuela's oil assets following Maduro's removal. So there's a strategic acquisition. Singer's firm has bid approximately $6 million for a network of U.S.-based oil refineries that could be worth up to $12 billion if Venezuelan heavy crude oil flows freely again under a new U.S.-backed government. So there's a lot to unpack here with AIPAC. I found the AIPAC chart during the full moon to be super interesting because that pack of planets in Capricorn right now have been transiting over that pack of planets in Capricorn in AIPAC's chart. We have Mercury, Venus, the Sun, and Mars going over Venus, Mercury, Sun, and North Node in this chart. Plus, Jupiter at 21 degrees of Cancer was in exact conjunction with AIPAC's Uranus at 21 degrees of Cancer. Also, we have to factor in that conjunction between Saturn and Neptune in Aries this year. They will be coming, I should say Saturn should be coming closer to the moon in this chart this year. But as far as all of the what has AIPAC to gain, well, if we have all of these things right now coming close to the North Node, which is the point of entry where energy is coming in, or supplies or actual physical things are, in this case, we're talking about money. So it's coming in. Also, Venus is the money planet. So having a Venus conjunction during all of this is also very interesting. And if we're looking at the most obvious thing about this transit, the transits going over this chart, the full moon was opposite of Venus and Mercury and squaring its moon. So setting off a lot of things into motion here. My intention was to highlight just how much tends to happen at this time of year. And as I've been sitting here recording this talk, I see the news coming up, this crisis in Australia. More specifically, Australians are being advised to flee Iran as soon as possible due to an escalation of protests that have been in escalation since the end of December 2025. And there are several deaths reported, so this is a terrible situation. And I think that since we're talking about the astrology of this month, which is pretty significant, again, as we speak right now, today and tomorrow, which here would be January 9th. Today is the 8th, where I'm located. And on the 9th, Mars will be in the heart of the sun. Mars will be burnt up by the sun. This is a very intense astrological occurrence. And although there are some positive manifestations, you could say, there are also definitely the negative. And Mars being one of the so-called lesser malefic planets that's linked with war and disaster and people getting hurt. And it's in the sign of Capricorn, which relates to military, government, and also, just like its polar opposite sign, has some bearing on foreign affairs and nationhood. And remember what happened a few years ago, January 6th, 2021, the Capitol riot in Washington, D.C., with all the Trumpers. Nothing about that event was coincidental. It was all very planned, and it was all linked with some very intense astrology. But suffice to say, this is a time of year where we see a lot of these political sorts of events being shoved in our face. And so this year, it's no exception. I wanted to give this overview because I enjoy mundane astrology just as much as I enjoy medical astrology and esoteric astrology. And I find that having an adequate enough idea of what's going on in the world is most certainly linked with our overall sense of well-being and moral integrity. So, on that note, I do wish you all a prosperous, happy, and successful year ahead, despite everything. I'm sure there will be more disastrous occurrences, but that shouldn't stop us from seeking to live out our best lives possible with the choices that we yet have to make, with the tools at our disposal, and to work together as families and communities. Thanks for listening. Again, this was Yeri with Astrology Healing Arts.